Mazel tov to everyone. It is a joyful scene here at Holy Blossom and all the spaces, all our sacred spaces and our atrium as well. Those voices you heard from the choir, I want you to know, are pre-recorded verses, so we are in this third wave of lockdown and watching very carefully all the health protocols to keep everyone healthy and safe. Hayom echad va'arba'im yom shehem shisha shavuot la'omer. Today is the 41st day, which is 5 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. To link the festivals of Pesach and Shavuot, we count 49 days from when we crossed the Red Sea to when we arrived at the foot of the mountain of Mount Sinai. This period of 7 weeks is a reflection on life in a wilderness. And that is where we find ourselves now, in a wilderness. For 15 months or so, we have been living in the in-between places, neither really here nor there, just waiting for something to pass over us, waiting for something to arrive, waiting for something to change. The New York Times now famously gave it a name, languishing. While for some, anxiety and fear in the wilderness of waiting are very real, most of us experience neither depression nor flourishing, but just a dull wilderness where the sand and rock are all shades of the same washed-out stone, ground down by the winds of time. But this is not how the Jewish people understands life in the wilderness. Just the opposite, in fact. We are taught that it was in a wilderness that Torah was given. It is in the wilderness where there is drama and movement. There is a time of experimentation and growth. We were not aimlessly wandering. We were not languishing. Instead, we read that in the wilderness we were guided faithfully and confidently by a pillar of fire at night and by a pillar of cool mist during the day. In the wilderness, manna fell to sustain us, and water flowed from the rocks. The wilderness is where rebels and revolts rose up, where leadership was tested and honed. The wilderness is a place of ingenuity and creativity, where the Mishkan was built, where our tabernacle was built out of bits of this and that, creatively, with acacia wood and semi-precious stones, dolphin skins and brightly colored wool and linen. The wilderness is where faith was deepened, and the Jewish people actually became a people. Along these lines, I'd like to say a few words to our Benot Mitzvah and to our confirmation class of 5781. Because you see, the wilderness is also understood to be the teenage years. When Am Yisrael left the infancy and the early childhood, when in Egypt we were completely dependent on God to sustain us, and not yet did we reach the promised land where we could, with our own two hands, sustain ourselves, with God's blessing, of course. But in the wilderness, in the Midbar, that was where we spent our teenage years. It was in the wilderness that we had the stage of life that was filled with growth and discovery. Yes, there is some wandering, I know, during the teenage years, and that is part of the course. But it isn't aimless wandering. Just as the children of Israel were guided through the Midbar, so are you now guided. Just as Bnei Israel were given the how-to book, the guidebook of Torah, so that they could find their way to a life that was meaningful and purposeful. So are you. The name of our double portion, Bahar Bechukotai, says it all just in 2 words. In a mountain, in my laws. Just as our ancestors were offered this gift of Torah at the mountain in the wilderness, and they answered with one voice, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do the mitzvot. We will come to understand the mitzvot. We will come to understand our place in this world wilderness. So do you now, our benot mitzvah and our confirmands. So do you say those words, Na'aseh v'nishma. In the teenage years of the wilderness, we learned not to go from dependence on God, our parent, to independence. Rather, in the Midbar, we learned to go from dependence to interdependence. And this is the Jewish ideal. Rabbi David Hartman teaches that the rest of the world may tell us to grow to be independent, to be self-sufficient. That is the highest goal in life. But not in Judaism. To be self-made, no such thing. Instead, we want you to know where you come from, to know that you are shaped by parents and grandparents, that you are honed by teachers and rabbis and cantors, that you are influenced by friends and challenged by siblings. You come from a people, and you come from God. And so the ideal is not to become independent, but rather to grow to be interdependent. Let you find your way to live, to be dependent on others, to count on others, and to let others know that they can depend on you. Depend on others for emotional support and let them know that you are there for them too. Depend on others for sustenance and let them know that you are there to provide for them too. Recognize that you rely on God for your very breath, for your very life, for your very neshama. And let God see that you, a human being created in the image of God, can bring more life to the world with your skills, your deeds, your talents, your commitments, your passions. Be interdependent. I know it takes courage to walk the wilderness. It requires faith in oneself and faith in one's people and faith in one's God. It also requires a sense of imagination, and I know that our benot mitzvah and our confirmands have a healthy measure of imagination. In the wilderness, we need to be able to see with our mind's eye what it will be like beyond the wilderness. And that's true for all of us now in this time of pandemic. These trying days, we must focus our sense of imagination for what is yet on the horizon, please God, not too far from now. So just as our young people have their eyes on the horizon and a curiosity about what the future will bring for them, so did our ancestors as they made their trek through the Midbar. The days were probably long for them, hot, slow, but they never lost sight of their vision of the promised land awaiting them. The ritual of counting the Omer is a practice in knowing that the journey is more important than the destination. We realize that counting the days of our wandering is to ensure that not every day is the same. And I know that life in lockdown, the days can blur. Who knows if it's Tuesday or Wednesday? But this day, this Shabbat, will forever stand in your memories and in the memories of those who love you as a special day, a milestone in your life's journey. This is the day that you, Lola and Tessa, were called to the Torah for the first time. This is the day that you, our confirmands, confirmed your commitment to Torah and mitzvot. You confirmed your place in the covenant between God and the Jewish people. You affirmed your place in this covenant struck somewhere in the wilderness. So I'd like to conclude with a kind of blessing for our young people. It's an excerpt of a poem by Maya Angelou entitled Continue. And really, it's a blessing for us all during these days of wilderness wandering. Into a world which needs you, my wish for you is that you continue to be who you are and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Continue to allow humor to lighten the burden of your tender heart. In a society dark with cruelty, let the people hear the grandeur of God in the peals of your laughter. Continue to remind the people that each is as good as the other and that no one is beneath nor above you. Continue to remember your own young years and look with favor upon the lost and the least and the lonely. To ignore no vision which comes to enlarge your range and increase your spirit. Continue to float happily in the sea of infinite substance, which set aside riches for you long before you even had a name. Continue in the wilderness, and by doing so, you and your work will be able to continue eternally. May each one of you go from strength to strength with all the potential that we see in you this day as we make our way through this wilderness journey of discovery, step by step, stride by stride, towards a place of promise. Let us encourage one another with those three words, chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. Be strong, and let us strengthen one another. Amen. Shabbat shalom.